It's official, guys. Stephen King is not the same author he used to be. Now, that's not an entirely bad thing. I actually think his writing has quite a few strengths now that it didn't used to. However, having just finished his newest novel, Holly, it has never been more apparent that King is in an entirely new phase of his career. And personally, when I read his work these days, the only thing I find myself truly afraid of is that his best work is behind him. Welcome back, everybody. I'm Jake, the Scary Story Guy, and today we're talking about Holly, the latest novel from the prolific, the legendary Stephen King. And if you're thinking to yourself, Holly, that sounds familiar, isn't that the name of the character who's shown up in like 5 of his most recent publications? Yeah, it is. We're back with detective extraordinaire Holly Gibney, who King has apparently fallen madly in love with. And this time, Holly is hired by the mother of a missing girl to solve the mystery of her daughter's disappearance, and the perpetrators don't exactly fit the usual serial killer profile. So I do need to get this out of the way right off the bat. I'm not the biggest Holly Gibney fan out there. I don't hate her, I just think she's ordinary, right? She's fine. And I'll absolutely confess at this point to being kind of sick of the fact that she shows up in like every new thing that Stephen King publishes. She was in all 3 books in that Bill Hodges trilogy, Mr. Mercedes, Finders Keepers, and End of Watch. She was in The Outsider in 2018, If It Bleeds in 2020, and now she gets a whole novel named after her. And I can only hope that this got Holly out of King's system. Not because she's not a good character, not because these stories haven't been quite good, but it does feel like King is sort of getting stuck in these Holly detective stories, and they're all kind of blending together for me a bit at this point. Nevertheless, we are going to talk about Holly, the good, the bad, the controversy, the politics. Let's start with the good, shall we? Stephen King is far too accomplished an author to be shit on by the likes of me, and Holly is simply another manifestation of that. He's become a much cleaner writer over the years. His first, 3 decades of writing, a lot of it seemed really meandering and frenetic, and he's really tightened it up a bit. He's not really going off on long tangents anymore. The quality of his prose has undeniably improved, and it's just really impressive to me because it shows that he is focused on honing his craft still after all these years when, he could just be, I'm just going to cash in on whatever novel I'm going to publish next year and leave it at that. Which, by the way, deserves a mention and quite a bit of credit because Stephen King deserves to be living on a yacht and wiping his ass with $100 bills right now, and yet he's still in that same place in Maine with his wife and his dog and just pumping out new novels at an extraordinary rate. You've really got to admire how much King loves and respects the game he's in. I mean, find someone who looks at you the way Stephen King looks at a blank page. I've also got to give him a shout out for the villains in Holly, Emily and Rodney Harris. That's not a spoiler, it's on the jacket of the book. Basically, they're a pair of elderly college professors who kidnap and kill people in this really interesting, sort of twisted way. And you can just tell that King put his whole ass into these characters, just kind of venting about, between the 2 of them, they're everything that's wrong with academics, excluding the serial killer thing. I thought they were the most memorable antagonists that King has come up with in probably a decade, maybe since Rose and Dr. Sleep. Now, that being said, I do want to point out that there are some inherent limitations in writing a detective story where you know the identity of the antagonists the entire time, because you're foregoing all the suspense that can come from like, oh, who's doing this, right? So instead, in this story, the suspense kind of has to come from like, okay, well, how are they doing this? Why are they doing this? Is Holly going to catch him in time? Is anyone that we care about going to end up in danger? Which, those things can be good, but it really did feel to me like in identifying the antagonist of the story right from the jump, King sacrificed a lot of the page-turning quality that Holly might otherwise have had. I personally did not feel like Holly was a page-turner in the least. I got stuck through it several times, actually, where I'd set it down and just not even think about it for several days. And that was one of the reasons, the fact that you know who's doing it from the very beginning. But I think another reason is that this book is very, very enamored of the time jump. We're bouncing around an awful lot, scenes taking place in July, then back to January, then back to July, and then, oh, now we're in February, now we're in August, and there's a bit of a trade-off when an author does that. Because on the one hand, it enables you to reveal the story at your own pace as an author, but on the other hand, if you jump around too much, then your reader can start to lose track of like the linear story, and it just becomes maybe more of a collection of scenes. You run into this with big fantasy novels, stuff like the Game of Thrones books or anything by Brandon Sanderson, where, you're invested in this particular scene with these particular characters, and then bam, you're flung to this completely new scene with completely new characters, and that's happening over and over and over again, and it makes it so as a reader, you're not on this linear journey, and it's hard to get into the groove of things. And so I personally didn't think that trade-off was worth it in Holly. I found myself getting ungrooved quite a bit more than I would like. Now, unfortunately, we do need to shift gears and talk about politics for a minute. If you've looked this book up online, you've probably seen that there's been some controversy about how King handled the hot-button political issues of the last few years. There's a lot of talk about Trump and COVID and vaccines, and it did rub some people the wrong way. On Amazon, you'll see that there are just this huge chunk of one-star reviews, but when you click on them and scroll through them, it does become apparent that most of these people did not actually read the book. So first of all, like, don't do that. I mean, my take is if you're upset by the political message that you're told something has, just don't watch it. Don't read it. It's simple. It would drive me so fucking crazy if all my videos were just getting mass disliked by people who weren't actually watching them, but maybe heard something about my politics and knew that they disagreed. And that's not to say you shouldn't dislike my shit. I mean, dislike away, please. Just watch my video first, right? It's like Dumbledore said to Harry, if you are to attack me, I would like to have thoroughly earned it first. Now, that being said, what is it specifically about Holly that has people all up in a tizzy? Is the tizzy warranted? So basically, this book takes place in the near aftermath of the Trump presidency and COVID. And Holly, our protagonist, is no fan of Trump, no fan of anti-vaxxers, and you hear about it on, let's say, every third page. Now, sometimes it feels like King is just using Holly as kind of an avatar to vent his own personal feelings about these kinds of people, but I would say that usually it actually feels somewhat true to the character. I mean, this is a neurodivergent woman with kind of obsessive-compulsive tendencies. It's really not surprising at all that this character would get super worked up about vaccine stuff. To me, I thought there was probably a bit more to object to in sort of these side characters that pop up throughout the book, people who either love Trump or hate the vaccine, because it sort of felt like King was just presenting these people as a caricature of what those positions are actually like. Sort of seems like he was knocking down his most extreme Twitter opponents in this book, rather than actually like engaging with how people really speak or think. This book just has a lot of characters saying things that no one actually like says out in the real world, or maybe like the most extreme 1% says, and Holly's just running into these people as like a routine part of her daily life. But then again, you know, that is kind of part of Stephen King. Like, characters in Stephen King books don't talk like real people. They talk like characters in a Stephen King book. And that issue is particularly bad in this book, by the way. At one point, Holly comes upon this group of like skateboarding kids and decides to ask them some questions, and these kids, oh my god, they talked like they were greasers from The Outsiders, right? And this is set in like the present day. But yeah, I guess I'd say you shouldn't be surprised by the politics in this book. We all know King is a very liberal dude. He's obviously got a serious case of Twitter fingers. That being said, it does, I think, make sense for things to be kind of more politically charged in this book, just because of the character and the time period where it's all happening. So if you read it and find that it pisses you off so much that you just have to give it a 1-star rating, go right ahead. But just know, if you're one of the people who does that without having read the book, I think you're a total dweeb, and I wish I could stuff you in a locker. Guys, at the end of the day, I'm just left kind of whelmed by Holly. I think that it's definitely got its strengths. I mean, King has obviously improved technically as a writer, and he's created some villains here who are very captivating. You know, things never drag when Emily and Rodney Harris are on the page. But ultimately, this book is just never that thrilling. It doesn't demand that you stay up late to read the next chapter. It sort of feels like a novella stretched out to full length, actually, with characters that you're already pretty familiar with, dare I say getting too familiar with. And it does just kind of make me long for the days when King was writing absolutely bonkers shit. Like the guy who wrote It, Pet Sematary, The Shining, The Stand, it sort of feels like that guy's just gone. And unfortunately, he's being replaced by a guy whose novels are still, you know, I mean, they're decent airport fare, but just a lot more within the lines and a lot less scary. I'm gonna give Holly 2.5 stars out of 5. All right, guys, stay tuned for more spooky content coming soon. Those of you who have been around for a while know that once upon a time, I actually wrote some scary stories. I'm getting towards the end of a new one, so I'll let you know when and where I publish that. And of course, new videos will be coming at least weekly, maybe more if I can swing it. But in the meantime, thank you for watching this video, and here's hoping you survive to see the next one.